Hi, everyone. I'm just going to give a minute to let some people trickle in, and then we can get started. All right. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Carmen, and I'm the training coordinator at the Temple Small Business Development Center. The Temple SBDC helps small businesses start and grow. We provide free one-on-one counseling and a variety of low to no cost webinars. We are proud to be a part of the nationally accredited network of SBDCs with over 1,000 centers across the United States. You have joined us today for intermediate podcasting for your Business 101 post-production. A copy of today's PowerPoint and a link to the recording of this session will be sent out to all attendees. And while all attendees have been muted, we encourage you to post any questions in the chat or Q&A. And now I will turn the floor over to Tony.
Hey everyone, how are you? Good to see, well, not see, but good to be with everyone again today. So today we are going to be talking about post-production. Now I'll add a little bit of caveat before we get started. Post-production meaning you've produced your episodes, or at least some episodes, as we've talked about throughout the program, and you have some content that you maybe are ready to start editing or to start working with in preparation for distribution, which is what we'll cover next week in sort of our final phase. Now, post-production is a term that we'll use for our purposes to mean editing of your podcast episodes. And so before we get into this particular subject matter today, what I want to point out is that this is quite a bit of information to cover in an hour. So I'm going to give you a bit of a crash course, but point you to other resources that you can use if you do decide to head down this path. At the same time, as I've said throughout the presentation week after week, and as you'll hear me say again today, this is the toughest part of all of this. So if there's any particular one thing that I would say you might want to consider hiring someone to help you with, it would be post-production. You can find editors or podcast post producers for you, either on Fiverr. Of course, there are companies out there like my company that also helps organizations and individuals with their post-production needs and their production needs as a whole. But this is really the one thing that you may want to consider hiring out for. It's the most time consuming for sure, and it's the biggest hurdle to overcome in all of this. Everything else you can pretty much figure out on your own. And I really have given you the tools week after week, and will continue to do so counting next week to really be able to produce on your own. But this is the toughest part of the equation. Once again, I'm an attorney managing partner of Lopes Law. If you're just joining us, I also have my own podcast, Self-Made Strategies, which please do check out. And feel free to visit our website or to follow us on social media at Self-Made Strategies, all one word. Self-Made Strategies, I've produced over 140 podcast episodes for myself. In the beginning, I did in fact hire an editor to help me overcome a lot of the initial hurdles. Over a period of time, maybe 30 or so episodes in, I finally kind of took the reins on that and started editing myself, for a variety of reasons, in part also because I wanted to really learn the nitty-gritty aspects of the process. And then since then, I'm currently editing most of the episodes, but we've had interns come in and out to help as well. So that's another option, is to hire an intern. Now, I will say that if you are going to hire someone outside, you really want to do your due diligence in making sure that they're the right fit. Make sure that you're asking them a lot of questions about what software they use, what their process is, maybe even ask them to kind of show you some of the work that they've done in the past, so that you have a good feeling for what you're getting and make sure that you're getting exactly what you want. So the agenda for today is basically all things post-production. And we'll talk a little bit about software. I won't go into every software, but I will tell you that I have used a variety of different software over the amount of time that I've been editing. And personally, I think today, Davinci Resolve by Blackmagic Design is the best software that you can get. And believe it or not, you can actually get a free version of that software that is very robust. And for purposes of editing the podcast, you don't need more than what the free version offers. So that's also another reason why we particularly like Davinci Resolve. Now at College Cast, which is one of my other organizations that I've mentioned throughout this, where we train and help college students to develop their own podcast, we train them on Davinci Resolve. So, and I do edit my episodes currently on Davinci Resolve as well. So this is really what I use as well. And I will show you Davinci a little bit today, but once again, to go through the entirety of the software with you would be way more than what an hour could entail. If you have questions, of course, feel free to drop them in the chat so that we can try to address them as we go. But again, at the same time, try to just hang on and stay with us as best as possible so that you don't get lost in the weeds. Really, most of today is going to be basically an overview, again, with a lot of details about some YouTube videos that you can check out. I've put links into the PowerPoint as well. So when you get this PowerPoint, you can go back and you can actually just click on the links to go to the specific videos that I've mentioned throughout, okay? We'll talk a little bit about tips for successful post-production, which includes, as we've mentioned in the past, successful production to begin with. So if you're producing well and you're recording great episodes, that's gonna make your life easier when you're editing. But a little grain of salt and compassion for yourself in the sense that even after 140 episodes, I still make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. You just have to be patient with yourself when you're editing. We'll talk a little bit about structure, and as usual, we'll get into sort of some cheat sheet aspects that you might be able to use for this. All right, so again, this is a little bit of a recap of what we talked about last week, but it's relevant to post-production because a lot of these same elements are going to come together when we're editing, okay? So you have your musical jingle and or sound effects for your show. I would caution you not to use sound effects. They tend to be a little cheesy, but a musical jingle for the beginning and the end is always a good idea. You want to, of course, have a longer explanation of what's in store for your audience in each episode as well. So in this episode, you're going to be hearing about the post-production process or whatever it is, and maybe list a couple of the bullet points that they can expect to catch on that episode. Then you might have a sponsor pre-roll. We call it a pre-roll. There's a pre-roll, a mid-roll, and an end roll, meaning at the beginning of the episode, the middle of the episode, or at the end of the episode. So if you're lucky enough to have a sponsor, you might be inserting that right at the beginning, and that might be a separate thing that you've recorded separately. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then, you know, you're going to do a guest intro. Now, if you do a great job and you have a fantastic edit straight through, or you're not too concerned about cutting out your uhs and ums, and I would say that done is better than perfect when it comes to podcasts for sure. It's more of a conversational medium to begin with. So leaving in some uhs and ums, that's not going to be the end of the world. And so going through with a fine-tooth comb and cutting every single one of those out might not make sense versus the amount of time that it would take you to clean something up like that. Okay, so those are kind of the elements. And then you have your outro and your call to action, which also might be a separately recorded piece. And we'll look at that a little bit again. And that would be your, you know, make sure to follow @selfmadestrategies on Instagram, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Visit our webpage to stay up to date on our episodes. Thanks for listening. Before we go, show some love to your favorite podcasts by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribing to our show. Stay tuned for our episode next week with If You Know the Next Episode. Okay, then maybe another sponsor message on the end roll and your musical jingle or sound effects on the way out. And again, here's your cheat sheet with all those elements. This cheat sheet is a good thing to have while you're editing as well. One, because you definitely, while you're editing, want to have an ear to what your audience is listening to. In the beginning, when you first start editing your own podcast or even listening to your own podcast, it can be a little strange and a little bit, it can take some getting used to hearing the sound of your own voice, playing things over and over and over again to try to see where you want to make cuts or where you want to make editorial decisions. All those things can be a little strange at first, but over time, like anything else, you get better and better at it and it's not as bad. So, but you want to have all of these elements and you want to make sure that you check all of this stuff off while you're editing, okay? So again, good editing starts with good content production. So when you're sitting down for your episodes, you actually want to give yourself a clap at the beginning and a clap at the end. Those claps create spikes in the sound waves on the editing, which I'll show you in a second. And what that'll do is that'll help you to find points to sync up your mixer sound recording with your Google Meet recording, with your external cameras recording, if you followed the procedure that I've talked about here. Now, if you're just using Google Meet and you're letting Google Meet roll, which you could do. Now, again, I will say this, caution, I've said this before the last 2 weeks, I'll say it again, caution with using Zoom. Zoom, not that I have anything against it as a communication medium, but for podcasts, tends to cause several problems in post-production. The sound doesn't sync up right normally. Zoom is typically recorded at 25 frames per second, which is actually a European standard, not a North American standard. And by North America, I do mean North America. And so those frame rates cannot be synced up right. And if you're using the Rodecaster Pro, which is recording your audio at a rough estimate frame rate of 24 frames per second, believe it or not, that 1 frame a second will throw your audio off fairly quickly. A nightmare to deal with. That's what we call drift in the business. And so if you have sophisticated software, which again, I am not covering additional software here, there are other software solutions for what's called drift correction. So if you had to use Zoom for some reason, what you could do is you could get some software called Pluralize 4, as a matter of fact, is I think the most recent version. But I will say that that is not foolproof either. And so using Zoom comes with a lot of potential headaches. Generally speaking, in my experience, I've been using Google Meet for around 20 or so episodes now. And I stick to Google Meet because it's recorded at 24 frames per second, which matches your audio mixer or American standard. And you should have your camera set to, if you're using an external camera, to 24 frames per second as well. So everything should be at 24 frames per second. That way, those claps will sync up and you won't lose sync throughout the episode, most likely, okay? Nothing is foolproof, certainly, but that, in my experience, has been the most likely to succeed method, okay? So clap at the start, clap at the finish. So it's very simple. And then you start talking. And then at the end, when you're done your episode, let your guests sign off and all of those things. Give it a couple of moments of silence. And that's it. And so you can see that visually, my hands will be together and there'll be a clap sound effect. And hopefully that wasn't too loud for anyone listening to this. That will be in there. And then I'll show you in a second when we look at the software that you can line those things up together. Okay, so that will help. Now, video podcasts, again, I highly recommend doing video and audio, but you could, of course, go audio only if you wanted to. But video podcasts are the direction that the industry is trending in. So in my personal opinion, it's not that much more of a heavy lift to edit a video podcast because realistically, you're not making a lot of crazy changes. It's just video and audio and you're editing the same thing otherwise. So to me, it makes more sense to incorporate video into your podcast from the beginning so that you're already ahead of the curve and working towards a more scalable and longer lasting platform, okay? So video podcasts, a lot of benefits, highly recommend doing that. But of course, I'll leave it up to you as an editorial decision, whether you want to do audio only or video and audio. If you're going to do video and audio, you do need to distribute 2 different versions. So you're going to cut an audio only version that'll go to your Apple Podcasts, your website, maybe if you don't want so much data on your website because the video files can be big, et cetera, et cetera. And then your video will live on YouTube or Vimeo or wherever else you want to use it, social media, clip down, et cetera. Okay. So you're going to use that same show outline that you used for your production to create your show notes, and you're going to make any changes. You're going to use that show outline as you're listening along and editing to make some notes and changes to anything that was added or removed during the episode. Okay, so you're going to edit that a little bit while you're editing your episode as well. Gives you something good to do while you're listening. So a good podcast editor, again, might be worth the cost. These are last year's numbers, but you can probably find someone that's charging $60 to $140 per finished half hour of audio. Meaning, if your episode ends up being 30 minutes long, they might charge you $60 to $140 an hour. If it's an hour-long episode, it might be double that. Again, you might be able to hire some new talent. Some college students might have some of these skills coming out of college these days. And as the industry continues to grow and grow, I could see that being more and more of a common thing. But I do want to say that a professional editor is worth their weight in gold because they help you to produce really good content. And by the way, if you've ever hired a social media editor or somebody along those lines, they tend to charge a fair bit of money, around $1,000 a month. So if you think about it, these editors sometimes come in a little bit cheaper, and you might be able to work something out where it combines with your social media plan or something along those lines. So consider it a marketing expense for your business. And remember that you're really not doing this on a monthly recurring. If you're listening to the advice that I'm giving you, you're doing 10 episode seasons. So you can budget for that. You can have a good solid ballpark number. You can work out flat rates with your editor just to keep things a little bit more cost conscious. But it really depends on the content and the amount of work that you're doing. It can get a little expensive, but it's worth it, in my opinion. All right, so post-production, what do you need? Well, first and foremost, of course, you need a desktop or a laptop computer. And I would say that it should be relatively fast-ish. I have an old MacBook Pro that is excellent and can still handle some lighter editing. Not editing 4K on that, not editing anything higher than that on that. But I have edited podcasts on there and video podcasts even to this day. And the old gal is sticking through and is still doing a pretty good job. And that's a 2013, 2014-ish MacBook Pro. By the way, insider tip, you can a lot of times buy refurbished MacBooks or MacBook Pros or things like that from Apple at a fairly significant discount, and they're only a couple of years old. So I might look for something that's a refurb through Apple personally that has higher end hardware on it so that it can handle a little bit more heavy lifting and stick with that. My actual computer that I'm talking to you from is an iMac. Nothing particularly crazy or out of this world in terms of specialness of equipment, pretty standard, does have a fairly good video card, and I've upgraded the RAM to be able to handle a little bit more. And on occasion, if I'm editing something that's 4K or higher, it might struggle a little bit. So your machine should be fairly powerful. You want to have external hard drives because this content will certainly add up and fill these guys up. I personally, again, no particular skin in the game, but I use Samsung T5s. They've always been really, really good, really, really reliable. For me, you can get 2 terabyte, 1 terabyte versions of these relatively cheap. By cheap, I mean $100 to $200, which if you're looking at other hard drives might be more expensive than that. So these drives are pretty good, and they're solid state drives, so they're quick. You can actually edit your podcast right off of them and be okay. And you need a good set of headphones. I particularly use I still use old school plug-in Bose headphones as my studio monitors. These are, I think, QC 25s or 35s, whatever they are. They plug into the headphone jack of the computer, and I use these. They're great. You can also get Sony headphones that are pretty good. There's a $90 set, which I can recommend. I think they're around $90-ish on Amazon. They're the headphones that you see a lot of people using in studio. Not a lot of bells and whistles, but basically your same set of headphones that you use to record your podcast should be the set that you're using. They should be good enough to record and good enough for post-processing. but you do want a good set of headphones because you'll be listening in for very specific things. So the software that you're going to use is Davinci Resolve, which I'll show you in a second, as I said. Again, you have links in here, which you can just click on, or you can just go to Google and Google Davinci Resolve. You'll see it's made by a company called Blackmagic Design. So let's go to that. So can you see my screen? And do we have any questions? Because I see some stuff popping up in the chat.
We can see your screen and we do have a question in the chat.
Okay, great.
Rana asks, when interviewing others not at your location, is there a way to foolproof audio and lighting for visual podcasts? Is there a way to fix audio/lighting on the back end? And she said she was a little bit late as well.
Good. Thanks for that question. That's a great question. So not much you can do on the back end to fix it. There are some things you can lighten up the highlights, but it's never going to look perfect. Again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to get good material recorded on the way in, and to make sure that you're getting the best recording that you can when you're doing it. When you're recording remote guests, there's not much you can do aside from reminding them on multiple occasions to wear headphones, have good lighting, be in a quiet spot, and have a solid internet connection. But the rest is up to the digital gods, quite frankly. And there will be bumps in the road here and there, and there'll be hiccups on the audio. Again, you just gotta kind of stick it out and make the best of it, especially under remote recording circumstances. Now, for yourself, a good external light. The more external components you have, depending on your budget, the better it's going to be. We use video lights, but again, we produce podcasts, so I have a lot of equipment. I'm fortunate in that sense, but I use an external video light to light myself. I don't use the house lights in my office here. I usually have background lights like I did in the last recording last week. So if you go back and look at that, you'll see some background lights behind me. I do things like that. I use an external camera. I use my separate Blackmagic camera, which I showed everyone last week as well. So external equipment is going to help you to reduce the likelihood of a failure and to have built-in backup plans. Because if my camera does drop a recording, and it's happened, there have been situations, there was a situation not that long ago where I thought the camera was recording, we record the episode, and about 5 minutes in, the camera cut off its recording. Luckily, I was recording on Google Meet, so at least I had our interaction in the video from Google Meet as a backup. So having backups, having contingencies like that is always a good idea. Now, audio, you can do a little tweaking. Your own audio, if you're recording it to a separate mixer, and if you're recording it on your site separately, not the digitized Zoom or Google Meet audio that's compressed and recorded over an online server, your audio you'll be able to do a lot with, because you'll have what's called the raw or the WAV file of the actual audio. Same with the video. You can do a lot more if you have the actual recording. Now, what's coming out of Zoom or what's coming out of Google Meet is compressed. So that means it's already been digitized, that's already gotten a solid coating of encoding done to it. So unfortunately, under those circumstances, there isn't a ton that you could do, okay? So when you open up Davinci Resolve, you'll see a window like this one. And this window has my prior projects, so you can see a bunch of the episodes I recorded, and if I hover over them, you can see some stuff. Now, I have a template set up, which you can do later. And if you do set up a template, you can just Google Davinci Resolve video editing template, look at some YouTube videos. Pretty straightforward once you've mastered the editing. Don't worry about that until you've got some editing down under your belt and you feel pretty comfortable. So I'm just going to go to the most recent episode, which was 140. I'm going to open it up. And here is Davinci Resolve when you open it. Now, at the bottom here, sorry, let's see if I can get this to go away. At the bottom of the screen here, you have this page toolbar in Davinci Resolve, okay? And you have media, cut, edit, fusion, color, fairlight, and deliver. So these are all pages. And one of the cool things about Davinci Resolve is that these are all actually different software suites that have been combined all into one. If you were to use Adobe, as in Adobe Premiere, Audition, After Effects, etc., you would actually need separate programs to cover all of the stuff that you can do in Davinci Resolve. For our purposes, all you're going to worry about is media, edit, and Fairlight, okay? Ultimately, if you were going a little higher end, maybe you'd do some coloring. And here on the color page, don't get overwhelmed by all this stuff that you see here. Here on the color page, we could tweak a little bit of the highlights and things like that. Okay, so I could play with, if I didn't get fantastic lighting, I could play with it a little bit. But as you can see, this guest here, Joris, this guest is actually coming in from Zoom, I'm sorry, from Google Meet. He joined us from Spain. So this is a remote recording. And I'll come back to this in a second, but you'll see that there's not a lot that I can do to play with what we're getting from Google Meet. But I can play with my own video and sweeten that up and make that look a little bit better, or I can play with my own audio and sweeten that up. I still do a little bit of tweaking to the guest's audio, but it's not going to be a ton because it's been digitized. Okay, so let's start with the media page. So if you're in Davinci, you click media down here on the bottom, if you can see my arrow, hopefully. You click on media, and this is the media page. Now I can literally drag and drop things into here and drop them down. Now I'm not going to do that right now, but so basically you get your audio files, you get your intro and your outro, you get your logo, which you should have for your podcast as well. You get all of those things. You get your Google Meet video, which in this case, our Google Meet video is this one right here. So it's got this funky name because that's the meeting name. It was recorded on August 26th, yada, 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 MP4. So I get that in my Finder or in my file folders, my File Explorer, and I literally just drag and drop it right into this section, into media. Once I've drag and dropped everything in, and by the way, if we go over here to where it says FPS, you'll see that all of them are either 23,976 or 24 frames as I go down, right? So again, 24 frames, it will matter. So you want to make sure that you have all of that around the same 24 frame number. All right, so I drag and drop everything into here. Now, if you only have Google Meet and you only have your WAV files recorded, which here are my WAV files, right? So here you go, you can see what the WAV files look like. So if you only have your Google Meet and your WAV files, you would just have 2 files in here. Now you should still have your logo file, which here's my logo for Self-Made Strategies. You might have your intro and your outro music. So you'll have all of those files in here. So that's in your media section, pretty straightforward. Now, once we've got all that, we go over to edit. Now, what our edit pane is essentially, and this is where things start to get, of course, a little confusing. But again, try to bear with me. I still recommend. Go ahead. Do we have a
Sorry,
question?
yeah.
Okay.
We have 2 questions in the chat and Q&A following
Thanks,
up about
Carmen.
lighting.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. The first one says, would you recommend outdoor recording for better lighting? And the second one asks about using a ring light.
Okay, great questions. Outdoor recording is probably a bad idea starting out, and I'll explain why. One, the lighting is actually very variable. So there are apps that you can get for your phone to predict where the sun is going to be in the sky. Actually, in video production, we use it a lot so that we can try to predict when we're recording outside. Podcast recording should really be done inside. Windowless room is probably best. And it should be a room that has a lot of curtains, maybe a carpet, tablecloth covering the table or surface that you're working on, because the flat surfaces around you will actually reflect sound waves and create a lot of what's called reverb. Another issue you might run into is if you're recording outside, you're going to get a lot of outdoor noise in the background, and it's not going to make for a very clean recording. So I don't recommend, especially starting out, recording outside. Too many variables. I would stick to inside if I were you. And then the ring lights tend to be a good tool. I will tell you that most ring lights don't perform as well as you would hope they do unless they're very, very close to your face, unless you have a really high-end and expensive ring light. So generally speaking, I think an external video light like a aperture 120D, which is what I use, or I was looking around to see if I had any handy that I could just pick up, but or something along those lines is probably going to be better. A nice bright, you can also get on Amazon, there's a company called Neewer that tends to make cheaper video equipment, and that's Neewer, and they make LED panel video lights. There's a set that you can buy that has 2 of them on big light stands, LED panel lights. Read the reviews, look at them. They're probably about 1 foot by 1 foot or so in size each panel, and those tend to be better. You can really kick those lights up pretty bright. You want to have your lights, by the way, at roughly 45 degrees, not directly in front and not too high up above, but a little above your eye line and about 45 degrees and tilting downward toward your face. And what that's going to do is that's going to create the lighting like you see on my face right now. This is actually typically referred to as Rembrandt lighting, where you have sort of a triangle of light with some darkness and then a much brighter other half of the face or so, maybe 3/4 of the face. And that's the type of lighting that you're looking for, really. So 1 light would be good enough per guest at roughly 45 degrees. You can also get some white poster board and set it on the dark side of your face to kick up a little bit of light if you want. You can mess with the lighting in that way. I can also, since this is a pretty high-end video light over here, I can kick this up pretty bright, and you can see that it's already significantly brightened. It's lighting. This is the only light on right now in the room. I actually have the ceiling light off, and it gets up pretty bright. So a good video light is worth its cost for sure, and can help you to really brighten up your face. Now, your guest, you're going to be limited to what you get, right? So hope that they're in a relatively well-lit area. I will say, and as you can see from Joris's picture here, he was relatively well lit. There's a little bit of coloring, a strange color cast on his face. Again, it's Google Meet, so you get what you get. And there's the comparison of me on Google Meet. But the reason that my image tends to look a little bit better than the guests, and I'll just enlarge this to make it a little easier to see. The reason that mine tends to look a little bit better is because I'm actually using my Blackmagic camera into the computer, okay? And that is what's being transmitted to Google Meet. So if you use the XC10, the Canon XC10 that I recommended, or some of the other cameras that we talked about, most of those you can use as a secondary webcam by plugging it into your computer using a USB to HDMI cable connector and a converter. You sometimes have to buy a converter to do that. But using that will help to clean up the image. Any other questions, Carmen?
We're all set for right now.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. All right, so we're in the edit page. We've got our files up here. So up here in the left is where all of our files that we dropped into media are residing right now. Now I can change this so that I can see the thumbnails. As you can see, I can scroll over it. I'm not holding anything down. I'm just running my mouse over it to see sort of what's on each file. Here's the Google Meet recording. And then up here, here are your WAV files. They all look kind of funky, this green, yellow, red wave up here, okay? So you take each of those and you drag them down onto this section down here on the bottom right, which is basically what we call our timeline. So it's linear in time, and it starts at, in this case, 1000. So at the very beginning, it would be 1000. And I'm not going to play this, but I have my intro set up in here, and I can zoom in and show you. This right here is my intro. Okay. And this line, by the way, that I'm going to grab and run right here, splits the audio, which is on the bottom here, and the associated video up top. Now, those things all run above and below each other. And the way that it essentially works is whatever's highest on the video timeline is what's going to be seen on this top right screen up here. This top right screen is basically our player or our viewer that shows the end result of what would be on the final video. So as I run along, and let me just mute these so that you're not being accosted with lots of sound, and M is for mute on these audio tracks. So as I run the playhead, which is this big red bar up here in the top right, you can see exactly what will happen in the final video. Okay, so as I run it along, 1 second. So I run it along, my logo pops up, it comes in, it expands, then it goes away and it goes to me. Now, since there's no video up here in this gray space above my video down here, this is what you'll see, of course, on that playhead. Now, as we scroll along, you'll see in this particular case, I just used the Google Meet. So Google Meet is making these transitions happen so you can get a good idea of what would happen in that case. Okay, so if you're just using the Google Meet, that is what you would see. You would have your intro here. And by the way, here, this purple right here is just this white background because my logo is transparent. So if I hit this little button here, this disables or enables the particular video track. So if I disable that track, you can see what it would look like without the white background. So it has a white background under the logo. The logo is on top, so you see the logo on top of the white background. Because it's transparency is why you see the white background popping up, okay? So if you have one track from Google Meet, you would have this one track. And all these little cuts in here, these little black lines, are editorial cuts that I've made where I've cut something away and then brought it all back together to make a cut. So I'll show you what that looks like really, really quickly. So first and foremost, audio is down here. All these green blocks are audio. You can change these colors if you want to, but we won't get into that. So what you see here is my audio is on this audio track 3, and then the guest audio is on this audio track 4. These audio tracks are recorded separately from my mixer. They're then using the claps that I told you to use before. And a clap, by the way, will look a lot like what's right here. This isn't a clap in this particular case, but visually it looks a lot like that, like a spike in the audio track. So if you clap, you'll see a clap on your audio track, and then you'll see a clap on the Google Meet audio track. And you can grab that with your mouse, slide it until those two lines are above each other. And now you should be either exactly in sync or very close to in sync. And by in sync, I don't mean Justin and the gang, I mean audio synced up with your video. So when you're talking, the audio matches it. If it's not in sync, you may have to move one left or right a little bit until it's in sync. And then you can use what's called the blade tool by pressing either B or going up here where my mouse is, right here to this razor blade looking tool, clicking on that, and you'll see that now my cursor is changed into what looks like a razor blade. So I'm not going to save this that I'm about to do because I'm about to hack this up. But as you can see here, there's a continuous video with no edits in it, where the guest was talking. I liked what was going on. The guest's audio down here, as you can see, is fine. By the way, I can use the blade tool for audio. I can use the blade tool for video, both, etc. And as long as you have this magnet, as you can see where my mouse is up here in the center, the snapping tool highlighted so that it's white, it will magnetize to this cursor to our playhead. So if I move the playhead to a place that I want to make an edit, let's say I don't like what the guest says here, so I want to cut from here, and I want to just go ahead and click on the audio, click there. So now I've made, as you can see here, a cut on all three and created a splice essentially in that portion of the video and the audio tracks. And again, because it's magnetized, all of them are in the exact same spot. So I move my playhead to where I want to cut the next thing, and maybe I want to cut it right where I come in. So right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut there, and cut there. So now you can see where my splice begins and where my splice ends. Now I can hit A for arrow, or just select the arrow up here in our tool selection in the center. And I can just drag and highlight all of these. And you can see that they're highlighted in red. And now if I hit shift, hold down the shift key and hit delete or backspace, it will do what's called a ripple delete and delete what I've edited out and join the two automatically. Okay, so that's a quick way to do your edits once you're in here. And that's basically what you'll do throughout the entire process. And now what you're seeing me do is hit Control or Command if you're using a Mac and the letter Z, and that's undoing step by step each of the things that I just did. So Control Z or Command Z is your best friend if you make a mistake, because you can literally just step back until you've figured out what mistake you made. Now, quick pro tip, and that is, this is a mistake that a lot of people make. So I just hit B to go back to the razor. I'm just gonna make some cuts, cut. And now let's say I made these cuts. Let me go back a step. Let's say I've made these cuts and I think I've got everything. So I hit A for arrow, or I hit the arrow key up here. I highlight what I want to cut out. And I don't know if anyone has noticed, I missed a cut. So now if I hit shift delete, something happened. What happened here? So what I did was I accidentally didn't cut the guest audio on the out here. And now I cut too much of it. So again, just Control Z takes me right back to my last step. And I can actually just step backwards the whole way back. So a lot of times, once again, that's going to be your best friend in figuring out what went wrong and kind of backpedaling to the last step. You really need to be paying hyper close, hyper focused attention to what you're doing with this, because a little slip up like that can cause you a lot of issues, can send things out of sync, can do a lot to mess up the file. Now, again, I won't go too deep into this because we're at 6:15 already. And as you can see, this is a lot to take in. So again, grain of salt, be very patient with yourself. This is the step that's probably the hardest for most of you, and it takes a lot of adapting to. So the next thing, or the first thing actually that we would do, is we would go to media, we dump all of our files. We go to edit, we sync everything up. Before we start cutting anything, we go to the Fairlight tab down here on the right with the music symbol. So we go to Fairlight. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in just so we can see. Fairlight is audio only processing. So it's not going to affect our video for the most part. It's only going to affect our audio tracks. So as you can see here, I have my track 3 is my audio, track 4. And by the way, you can rename these if you wanted to. So I could go here and I could just change this to guest to make my life easy, change this to Tony, and there you go. I've renamed my tracks. Doesn't do anything, just makes my life easier. You can also color code these tracks if you wanted to change the color. There are ways to go down here to clip color, and I can change it to apricot, for example. So I know all apricot will be me. Okay, Control Z to get rid of that once again. Okay, so in here is where I would do some of or all of my audio cleanup. Now, for those of you who are going to be brave enough to dive into this and to try this on your own, I commend you first and foremost. But the easiest thing for you to do, I'm just going to give you very quick tips because this gets pretty intensive. You highlight a track. So in this case, my track, track 3, A3. You go over here, you can see that on the right, the tracks are listed A1, A2, A3. I can actually just click on these to highlight them as well. And bus, which is actually sort of the main track of all of them combined. So I'm going to go to A3, which is my track. Again, you can see it's highlighted. And I'm going to go over here to where it says EQ and this line, and I'm going to double click on that, which is going to pop up our equalizer. Down and dirty, super quick, fastest way to do an edit to clean up audio. I'm giving you all the secret sauce right here, right now. Don't question why, just do what I'm suggesting, okay? You can certainly deep dive and go figure out the mechanics and the engineering behind all of this and why different frequencies act the way that they do, but I am here to try to make your life easier, not to explain all of audio engineering, okay? So, and I did teach myself this. So, and I'm a lawyer by trade. Once again, I'm not at all, I before doing this, had not taken any audio classes with time. You can teach yourself to do this. But here's the quick and easy version. So first and foremost, open up the equalizer. You would do the same thing for the guest track. You're going to hit band 1 and hit band 6. And you can see that we've already got some curves here on the ends, making our line now nice and tailed off on both ends. Going back to back 1, you're going to grab this slider and just go until this number right here that says frequency is at around 100. Okay. Now what that's doing, so this is the one thing that I will explain. What that's doing is it's eliminating all background noise that's below this frequency of 100 hertz. Okay. And I believe it's 100 hertz if I'm not mistaken. So it's cutting out anything that's below that. Up here at the top, over at band 6, you're going to roll it back until you're right around between 10 and 11K. So 10,000 to 11,000 hertz, cutting out anything higher in frequency than that. We don't need it. Okay, next step, go over to band 2 right here, and you're going to hit this drop down and change it to this more focused point. You'll see that some stuff, Q factor and gain, etc., has popped in. Don't worry about any of that. You're going to go back up here to this graph and grab the number 2. Here's the number 2. Now you're going to hit spacebar on your keyboard when you grab the number 2, and I'm grabbing it and I'm holding it, as you can see. And as I hold it, I'm going to hit spacebar, and you can see up in the top right that our video is now playing. So if it wasn't muted, and it's muted for your own benefit, if it wasn't muted, I'd be able to hear what's going on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the number 2, I'm going to drag it up here to the top, and I'm going to scrub it back and forth like this. And you're going to hear some really disturbing sounds as you're scrubbing it back and forth. Wherever you hear that disturbing sound, you pause and drag it down under that center line, just like that. Then you're going to go ahead and grab number 3. You can see that number 3 is already changed to that drop down. Grab number 3, you move it further down, do the same type of scrub wherever you hear the sound. And you can tell, by the way, more or less that I know that those harsh sounds are in these ranges more or less for me. Okay, so now I'm talking, I would be listening, I'd grab the number 4, I'd do the same thing, let's say it's around there, boom, drop it below the line. And now number 5, we're gonna hit this drop down, do the same thing, change it to a more focused modifier, grab the 5, do the same thing, and I'm guessing around there, and bam, below the line. So now you can see what my EQ curve, and I can hit spacebar to stop playing now. So now you can see what my equalizer curve looks like. This is more or less what yours should look like, more or less. You need to listen a little bit to catch where, and you'll know those harsh sounds, by the way, they sound very harsh. They sound very out of tune, okay, from a sound perspective. And that's it, I'm done. Now I go to the guest track. Maybe I roll back, by the way, on the player, right, to a point where the guest is talking. And you can see in these large chunks in the waves. So right here's the guest track. He talks a lot right in here. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to his EQ now. And you can see it's flat because we haven't done anything yet. I'm going to hit spacebar. There you go. You see him going up in the top right. I would be listening, and I would do exactly what I just described. Band 1, band 6. Take the frequency on band 1 to around 100. That's a no-brainer. 102 is fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. Go between 10 and 11 over here. That looks good. All right, change band 2 to this. Grab the number 2 up here and drag it along, and it would start sounding harsh somewhere in here. Drop it down below the line, more or less to that first line. Go to number 3, do the exact same thing. I'd be listening. Oh, sounds a little really high pitched or noisy or disruptive to my ear. Drop it down. Number 4, same thing. Let's say it's there. And then number 5, don't forget to switch these drop downs. By the way, let's say you forget to switch the drop down. You can see that the curve looks way different. It's not doing that really focused point, right? So again, Control Z, right back to where I was. Make sure I drop that to the focus. And now I've got a nice focused curve that I can grab, and I can drop it down there. Now it's good. I can hit spacebar to stop playback, X out of this. And on the right here, you can see on the tracks, they've got nice EQ'd curved lines. And if you could hear the sound, you would hear that the sound sounds a lot smoother, less harsh. A lot of the background noise is gone. A lot of the high pitch noise is gone. The voice maybe has a little bit more bass and sounds sweeter. A lot of people, you might hear it describe it as buttery or very smooth, very, very, very good. It sounds good, sounds more professional. And that's all you do. I will say that a lot of times, again, this audio coming out of, even though it's recorded in the separate recorder, it's still coming out of the computer to the separate recorder, like I showed you last week, to the Rodecaster Pro, for example. So it's going to sound a little digitized, and depending on the guest's source audio, might not be that great. A lot of times, though, if the guest does use a better mic or uses their AirPods or headphones, you will get better sound, and you'll be able to sweeten it a little bit in here. Okay, so that's basically the Fairlight process. There's a little bit more that you could do in terms of advanced things. You could go in here to dynamics. You can mess around with these dynamics. We won't get into that on this session. There are videos out there. But if you did just the EQ that I just showed you, just that crash course, and you saw how quick it was, if you literally followed those steps, your audio would sound way better, 80 to 90% better. Just doing that, you would notice a massive difference. So there you go, crash course on Fairlight. So once we've done that, now we go back to our edit page and we make those editorial edits with the razor, like I was talking about. There, at that point, I'm just listening to it from beginning to end. When I hear something I don't like, or if the guest stutters, or let's say the guest stops and he says, you know what, that's a great question. Can I have a moment to think about that? And you go, yeah, sure, no problem. We'll cut that out. All right, so I'm gonna go back to the beginning. I'm gonna scrub back to the beginning to where right before he said he needed to think, cut it there with the razor, wait until he says, okay, I've got my answer. After that, boom, cut that with the razor. And that, by the way, you see these flat spaces here between the waves. These are essentially silence, right? Or little to no sound recording. That is why you want to say to someone, okay, take a couple seconds and start again. And then this silence that we just left of 2 or 3 seconds, it's going to give us a nice, clean, silent point to cut and move all that out. Okay, so that's it. That's essentially the editing process. Of course, at the end, and I'm just going to scroll to the end here. By the way, if you hold your Alt key and you use your mouse wheel, you can zoom in or out, up and down. Okay, so that's how I'm zooming. You can also use your keyboard, or you see this plus minus up here. I can literally just click on this plus, or I can grab the slider and just slide it out or in. Okay, so you'll also notice that it zooms in wherever the cursor is, the playhead. Where that playhead is where it'll zoom in and out, okay? So if I wanna go to the end, I'm gonna go to the end over here. Let's say I finished editing. I've got my outro stuff ready to go. Let's zoom back in. So end of the episode, I finished editing. Here's where we're gonna cut it. And I've got my music. Here's my outro music on a separate track, my logo, okay, on the way out. And then we get to the, I've added that, of course, to the end of the episode, and we get to the literal end of the episode. So stop your playhead here and hit the letter O on your keyboard. And what that'll do is you see how this here has this sort of gray bar here. That is where it'll end the recording. So everything after that on this timeline will not be included. And the reason I mention that is because often what we do as a best practice is we take all the files that we have and we put them far to the right, like you can see over here. I have a bunch of files here. We make some edits so that we have a backup. If we mess something up, we can quickly just go grab the files and bring them back and start from scratch. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but we do that as a best practice. But you can't forget that you have that out there and not end the episode here, because then I would have a 3-hour episode with a lot of dead space in here in between, and then some weird stuff off at the end, or the whole unedited version at the end. So don't forget that. Or you could, of course, highlight and just delete this. And now you can see that it's dark gray because there's nothing out there anyways. But as a best practice, get to the end and hit the letter O to create an out point, the end of your episode. All right, so we're done editing. Let's just say we're done. We're going to go over here to the deliver tab. We're going to hit deliver, and you can see our timeline here at the bottom. And up here on the left, we have several options. Option 1 to create a video is just to hit this YouTube, Vimeo, or Twitter, one or the other. If you're cutting something for social media, I do recommend maybe considering using this Twitter version. You can hit the drop down and do 720 or 1080. And then you have a bunch of other options that you're not going to worry about all the way to the end where you have audio only. Then regardless of the version, and remember, you're going to cut two. You're going to cut a video version, then you're going to cut an audio version as well, separately, an audio only version. The audio only version, so let's start with video real quick. So you hit YouTube just to keep it simple. You change your file name here to whatever you want it to be. Then you browse where you're going to save it to. Standard, you should know how to do that. Down here on all these settings, the only thing you might change is format MP4 to make sure that it's MP4. Other than that, you don't touch anything else. Then you go down here and you hit add to render queue. And you'll see over here on the right that it's added a potential render over here. With the YouTube option, if you already have your YouTube account set up, you can see I have checked upload directly to YouTube. So actually, when Davinci renders this, it will literally just post it to me for me, assuming that my computer is connected to the internet. Okay, so that's really convenient. Remember, add to render queue, it pops up here on the right. Then you still have to hit render, either render one or render all. We'll get to that in a second. So let's scroll over here, top left again. Scroll all the way over to audio only. Hit audio only. Again, you may have to rename your file, pick where it's going to go. Single clip is fine. Under video here, which silly, I know, but it's here. You'll see that export video is unchecked. Leave it unchecked. Then you hit the audio tab. You can see that export audio is checked. Leave it checked. Change your format to WAV, okay? And then you're going to come down here. Your sample rate should be 44,100. That is important because Apple specifically asks for that sample rate, okay? So just do it at 44,100. You renamed your file, etc. You hit add to render queue. Again, it pops up here on the right. Now, my recommendation is first and foremost, find the audio only one, which is this one with the music note next to it, and hit render one. Render your audio first by itself, take care of posting that, and then come back and do your video separately. Usually you would leave the video rendering overnight. And the reason is the video render eats up a lot of computer memory and resources. It takes a long time and will slow your machine down big time. So my recommendation is that's a process you normally want to do overnight. When you're done with everything else, you don't have to use your computer for anything else. Maybe you want to shut down all your other programs so you're not taxing your machine too much and rendering that video by itself. That is what you want to do for that. And then the next day, you know, it should be posted. If it didn't work for some reason, obviously you may have to fix something. Do we have any questions, Carmen? I know we're up against 6:30. I'm going to try to breeze through the rest of the presentation.
We are all good on questions right now. I also posted a link in the chat. It's a 30-second survey about today's webinar. It's required by our funders at the Small Business Administration. This is going to be sent out in the follow-up email as well. We really value your feedback. So if everyone could take a moment and fill that out, we really would appreciate it. And I'll toss it back to you, Tony.
All right, thanks, Carmen. Yeah, so we just have a few more slides. These are going to be fairly quick because we covered a lot of the meat of the slides in looking at the software itself. But so that's sort of the crash course 30,000-foot view of the software. I'll touch on these slides again next week. So if any of you have to go, I'll come back and redo these. And of course, you'll have the PowerPoint. Just overall, if anybody has to run, I won't take too much longer, but the rest of the slides here are basically the steps that we just covered. And then each subsequent slide has links to helpful video tutorials for you. All of these are on YouTube. I've used them all. We've used them at CollegeCast as well for other people. They are very, very good. You can see that there's a syncing video and audio. There's a video on creating proxies and sending timelines. The reason for that is a proxy is essentially a lower res version that makes it less taxing on your machine. So you might want to look at that to see how that works. Then the crash course is really good. The beginner tutorial is very good. Audio processing, we talked about Fairlight. As a matter of fact, you can see that we covered a lot in the actual detail when we were in Fairlight. Again, more tutorials here for Fairlight specifically. Things like setting levels. A level would be like your guest voice is a little too low and you have to increase it to match it all across the board. So it shows you that. The EQ crash course, which is basically what I just gave you here during this session. Dynamics, which again, can be helpful to really, really hyper clean up things. But if you did just EQ, your audio is going to sound so much better. So just doing that will make a big, big difference. And then some other things that you could also do. Again, if I had to cut two things out, if you really wanted to keep it simple and DIY, just do the EQ and take a look at the levels course here, and you should be in good shape, okay? And then, of course, this is the deliver page. So a checklist for you with all of the details that we just talked about how to set everything up for delivery. So when you're doing your export at the end there, and that is pretty much it. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, I'm going to hang for a while. Sorry that I went a few minutes over here, and happy to take anyone's questions.
Also, as a final reminder to everybody, I got this question a few times just individually. This slide deck will be sent out along with the recording so you guys can reference it at any time, just as a side note on that. And I'll give a few minutes for questions before we close out.
Thanks for your help, Carmen.
Of course. Rosa said in the chat, thank you so much. You are awesome.
Thanks, Rose.
And Regina, I can link in the chat. We do have another course. I can link the registration really quick. I'll pull that up for you. And then I think we can close out. Okay, if we are good on questions, the next workshop in the series is going to be on the 14th. So a week from today at 5:30, same length to 6:30. Thank you, Tony, so much. And
Thanks,
everyone
Tony.
have a great night. Great rest of your week.
You
Bye.
too. Thanks.